Unbelievable. One ship quietly left the coast of British Columbia, carrying liquefied natural gas worth nearly 40 billion Canadian dollars. Its destination wasn't California. It didn't stop in Texas. It didn't touch a single American port. Instead, it sailed straight across the Pacific to South Korea. And with that single journey, Canada did something that hasn't happened in over 50 years. It broke free from an energy system Washington thought it would always control. This wasn't just a shipment, it was a signal. And what's driving panic in political circles isn't the ship itself, but what it represents. Because for decades, Canada has been America's most reliable energy supplier. More than 3.7 million barrels of oil per day flowing south, powering factories, refineries, and entire industrial regions from Chicago to Detroit. Canada produced the energy, but the United States controlled everything else. The pipelines, the ports, the rules, the leverage. And that's why when this vessel reached Incheon in just 10 days, nearly twice as fast as U.S. shipments crawling through the Panama Canal, it wasn't just carrying gas, it was carrying a message. Canada was done playing a secondary role. But here's the part that makes this story truly unsettling for Washington. This wasn't a sudden rebellion. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't loud. It was calculated. And it started years earlier with a project most American policymakers quietly assumed would never be completed. LNG Canada is a $40 billion project, the largest private investment in Canadian history, a joint venture backed by Shell, Petronas, Mitsubishi, and other global energy giants. Built in Kitimat, British Columbia, right on the Pacific coast. The first liquefaction unit is already operational. The second is moving into place. And this facility doesn't just process gas. It rewires power. To understand why, you need to understand the old system Canada was trapped inside. For decades, every molecule of natural gas Canada exported had to pass through U.S. territory. Pipelines crossed the border. Ports were American. Regulations were American. Tariffs were American. Canada had vast reserves in Alberta and British Columbia, but no direct path to global markets. Every route pointed south first. That meant Washington always held the pressure points. If tariffs rose, Canada absorbed the hit. If approvals stalled, projects died. If political winds shifted in the White House, billions of dollars hung in the balance. And when tariff threats started flying, first 25%, then 35%, then rumors of even higher penalties, Ottawa understood something critical. Negotiation alone wouldn't save them, so they built around the problem. The Coastal GasLink pipeline became the missing piece. 670 kilometers long, running entirely within Canadian territory. From the gas fields of Alberta, straight to the liquefaction plant in Kitimat. No border crossings, no American regulators, no foreign veto points. For the first time in history, Canada could export natural gas to Asia without asking permission from Washington, and Asia mattered. Japan, South Korea, and China aren't just buyers, they're competitors. They're fighting for long-term energy security.
Host of global energy corporations built a gas liquefaction facility right in Kitimat.
Canal delays and political uncertainty, Canada offered something rare: speed, predictability, and independence. The numbers made the advantage impossible to ignore. 10 days from Kitimat to Incheon, nearly 20 from the U.S. Gulf Coast, double the shipping time. Higher insurance costs, higher freight rates. Every saved day translated into negotiating power. Every avoided choke point became leverage. And with that first shipment, Canada proved it could bypass the United States entirely in the global energy equation. So how did a country with fewer resources and less global influence manage to complete what America still struggles to even approve? The answer lies in a lesson Canada learned the hard way, watching its own projects nearly collapse under internal chaos. That lesson has a name: Trans Mountain. The Trans Mountain pipeline spent over a decade trapped in legal battles. Provinces fighting the federal government. Environmental lawsuits piling up. Courts intervening. Approvals reversed. Costs exploding. At several points, the project came within inches of cancellation. And Ottawa finally realized something uncomfortable. If every layer of government had the power to block national infrastructure, nothing strategic would ever get built. When Mark Carney stepped into leadership, he moved fast. One of his first major actions was designating the East-West Energy Corridor as a national priority project. That status changed everything. Provincial vetoes lost their power. Legal challenges were consolidated into a single federal framework. Endless litigation loops were cut short. The rules became clear, and more importantly, stable. But that wasn't the move that truly unlocked progress. What surprised even critics was how the government handled Indigenous communities. Instead of symbolic consultation, Ottawa offered real ownership, legal equity stakes, binding land protection agreements, long-term development funds that didn't disappear after elections. This wasn't imposed consent. It was negotiated alignment. That distinction mattered. Because while Canada was quietly building consensus, the United States was tearing itself apart. Keystone XL became the perfect example of American gridlock. Approved, cancelled, revived, cancelled again. 3 administrations. 12 years. Billions of dollars burned. Not because the oil didn't exist. Not because demand vanished. But because the U.S. couldn't decide what it wanted. Every election reset the rules. Every court ruling reopened old wounds. In the end, the project collapsed under its own uncertainty. Canada watched all of it and drew a simple conclusion. If your energy future depends on who sits in the White House, you don't control your future at all. That realization reshaped Ottawa's strategy. When tariff threats resurfaced, Canada didn't respond with speeches. They adjusted internal pricing, absorbed short-term shocks, kept supply flowing. Midwest refineries stayed locked in because there was no cheaper alternative that fit their systems. When pressure escalated, the market barely flinched. Why? Because Canada wasn't fighting with words. They were fighting with infrastructure. Washington still believes power comes from being the loudest voice in the room. Canada proved power comes from owning the roots, the ports and the pipelines markets depend on. And now that LNG Canada is operational, the question isn't whether Canada can escape U.S. influence. That already happened. The question is what the United States does next. Imagine being an oil and gas engineer in Alberta. For decades, every project you worked on pointed south. Every pipeline ended at the border. You built systems that powered another country's economy while knowing you didn't control the price, the approval, or the outcome. You produced the energy, but someone else decided its fate. Now imagine standing at Prince Rupert Port, watching that LNG carrier pull away from the dock. 14 million tons of gas on board. Contracts already signed in Asia, routes mapped without American interference. That ship represents years of frustration turned into leverage. And this shift isn't abstract. It's personal. Kitimat was once a small town surviving on aluminum production. Today, it's a global energy hub. Jobs that once vanished south of the border are staying home. Families in Saskatchewan and British Columbia are seeing opportunities that didn't exist a decade ago. Indigenous communities, once treated as obstacles, are now co-owners, earning returns from infrastructure crossing their land. Meanwhile, the consequences ripple south. Refineries in the American Midwest that relied on Canadian crude now face tougher choices. Replacement oil from overseas costs more, processes slower, and strains existing equipment. That extra $3 per barrel doesn't disappear. It moves downstream. Higher fuel prices, higher manufacturing costs, more pressure on workers already asking hard questions. And this is where the real lesson emerges. Data can explain trade flows. Charts can show shipping times. But they can't fully capture the moment. You realize power doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from building something others can't ignore. Canada built. The United States argued. Canada listened. Washington ordered. Canada invested in permanence while America trusted influence alone. And now the market is responding. This isn't about who won a trade dispute. It's about who understood the future first. In a world where stability matters more than pressure, and infrastructure matters more than rhetoric, the shift has already happened.